Excellent, we're now recording. Well, thank you everybody. I'm glad to see you here today. Nice to have you coming back or joining us for the first time. My name is Morgan Denton. You know that because I have been hitting you with plenty of messages for sure. I'm inviting you to introduce yourselves in the chat box. It's always good to remind us of where we're coming from. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Emma Marie Banks. She's new to Maine DOE. She's been with us about a month. Emma, do you want to talk just for a little bit about what your role is and what you're doing with us? I think she might have frozen up there. Okay. Emma's with you know, the Learning and Technology program. She's our secondary specialist, and we're thrilled to have her here today because we're talking about how we do some of these pivots in this time of change, whether we had intended to or not. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen. Choose the right one. Here we go. All right. So, you know, I'm calling this recalculating. I kept thinking this is like when you're following your GPS and you take a wrong turn and it's going to get you back to where you need to go. I think that's a lot of what we have going on here. So here's what we're going to try to do before 4 o'clock for sure. We want to define this idea of a pivot. I want to explain why I've been hearing the word pivot a lot since this began. And at first, it was making me crazy. And now I think I really like that word. We're also going to get a sense of some directions. I think there's lots of choices to be made about directions to take. And we want to make sure we all have a clear picture of what some of these directions might be. And then why we might choose some of them. And we're going to begin some collaborative work. We're not as far down the road on that as I'd like to be, but we'll definitely get into that a little more. So here's this idea of the pivot. If you've ever played basketball, you know it's one of those things that you learn pretty early on, that you keep your foot firmly planted, right, on the ball of your foot, and it maintains that contact with the floor. And you're pushing with the direction with the other foot, and you maybe turn a little bit, you maybe turn a lot, but you maintain that contact. And that's what we're doing. We're really balancing, we're really looking at how we might change. So I'm just going to invite you for a moment in the chat box. Tell us, why is it that this pivot might be a great analogy to truly describe our current situation in education? Why might that be the thing that's working? Oh, Crystal.
I think we want to kind of keep our feet planted in what we know is educationally sound and maybe the concepts that that we know that we want students to have. But we also have to be flexible enough to change direction when we need to, so that we can meet the needs of kids in these very uncertain times.
I am so glad that you said that, and because of what I'm seeing in the chat box, this is very consistent with where I'm heading with these slides. So I think that we're all on the same page, that there's this idea of flexibility, but we also, there has to be that idea of staying true and staying grounded. We want to talk a little bit, and I've been trying to do this with you all along. It's talking about what we need right now and maybe what we want to think about long term. I know at DOE we're being challenged to think about not only finishing the fourth quarter, but how we get through summer and then even into the fall as well. So we want to think about what we're doing, responding to our immediate needs, but also taking some time to reflect on how that might inform us in the long term. So we need to keep in mind that, yes, we absolutely must be flexible. And what do you think of this guy doing yoga? And we definitely need to make sure that we have more than one option available to us. It feels terrible to be boxed in. Um, so, anything that we can do to increase our bag of tricks and make sure there are more options. But absolutely, let us not forget, we must remain true to our own values, right? We need to make sure we remember what it is that we're here to do. So I want to talk about choice, a little bit about what it means to make some of these choices. Choice boards are something that are, they're very popular right now. I think that you can find a ton of information about choice boards, and they certainly do fit the need for our current context. But I'd like you to think carefully about what choice really means. If we're going to create a choice board, let's start with the choices that are facing the teachers. What are the choices that we can make about the directions that we choose to take? So we want to keep a couple of things in mind. I've asked you from the start to really look closely at what are the must-do goals for this fourth quarter. What are the things you absolutely have to do, the things you have to accomplish? And it can be that you're trying to make sure you're not opening up a gap for the students as they begin the next year, or it can be something that's come from administration, something that has to happen. It can even be getting students ready for the next step. And then you can consider some of those would like to do goals. Some of the things like, your favorite unit comes in this fourth quarter and it breaks your heart to give it up. Okay, can we figure out a way to pivot a little bit and still bring in the thing that we love to do? So we want to look at how we plan for this flexibility and how we can build in some choices into our curriculum. To begin with, know your strengths. Go with your strengths. This is a time to really honor what you know, what you do, where you live. And then think carefully about your tools. I think in the first few weeks of this challenge, we jumped, there were a lot of things happening and a lot of things came flying at us. And, some of us tried different things, something that was new, trying to look for a way to get through this. And we found that not everything is compatible with what we have. And sometimes just the idea of having to try something else or piling something else was just a little bit too much of a load. So you start with your own strengths, you look at the tools that you have, systems, programs, experiences, what is there, what can you build from? This is that foot that's firmly planted on the floor. And another big question that you have to consider is capacity. What is your own capacity as you are doing your own coursework, as you are taking care of your own families, as you're trying to meet the demands of your schools? What is your own capacity? How much are you willing to learn and when? What can you learn right now? What can you maybe look at over the summer and thinking about what's coming up in the future? And really consider carefully how much time you can commit. This is key as you start planning choice, as you start thinking about the options that you want to provide for your students. Truly, think about yourself first. This is like on the airplane, right? Before you can help anybody else, you need to make sure that you're helping yourself. So make sure you're starting from your place of strength and you know what you have to work with. So then there's this idea of choice boards. I participated in a big choice board presentation coordinated by my colleagues in Ohio last week, and I stole this slide straight from them. But the point they wanted to make was that if you want to build some flexibility into your lesson planning and do something that looks like a choice board, you should know that there's lots of different models. There's lots of different ways to do it. Some can be very, very simple, some a little more complex. It's really up to you. There's not one way to build that choice into your curriculum. So here's the other thing that we want to think about. now more than ever, we really need to consider differentiation, right? We're looking at what it means to differentiate to meet all of our learner needs. And giving students choice it's not just about a particular task. It's about owning the entire process. It's about really finding that way to connect with the student and helping with that engagement piece. Because I have to tell you, I think engagement is the biggest question that I've been asked to help with. So the next thing that I really do want you to consider carefully is why. Why might you offer choice? From the start, we've been told to plan for high tech, low tech, no tech, just the amount of technology that the students can access. Oh, good Lord, I have a feeling we're gonna have a cat fight in a minute. I'm so sorry. So one of the first reasons to come up with choice is the amount of technology. But another thing that we really want you to consider is this idea that some of our students are truly flourishing in this environment. Like some students are really responding well to the current learning demands. And so we want to be able to take advantage of that. So we can provide a choice to let students shine, or to really give us an opportunity to differentiate, to provide some instruction for students who need a little targeted instruction. And the great thing about making some choices is that students who are grabbing onto it and flourishing and taking off don't need as much as of your attention as the student who needs that differentiation. So now you have a little time freed up to give the student that attention. And again, another reason to look at choice is to be mindful of capacity of everybody, of your capacity, your student's capacity, the parent's capacity to support the student, and in fact, the whole family. I know I've mentioned my daughter with 5 sons who just came and picked up food I cooked for them. And as a family, they like the kinds of activities that they can embrace and share together. When each one of the 5 boys has to do something entirely different and separate, it can be quite a challenge. So here's something we want to keep in mind as you're planning choices. Think about the success criteria for the choices that you're planning to provide before you even begin. So make sure that you know what is sufficient, because most of us are working in a pass fail or pass incomplete situation. So you want to know what is sufficient, or in other words, you want to know the success criteria to know exactly where the pass line is. Make that learning goal prominent and central to the task or the task that you're presenting. So you want to make sure that whatever pathway, whatever choice you're making, it's linking back to the same goal. Also, just limit choices. We don't want to open the world, open up to a world of everything. That can be just as paralyzing as having no choice. So a good rule of thumb is, if you are going to provide students with choices, limit it to 2 or 3. You can curate, you can direct and guide, but just make sure that you're placing some kind of a limit on the choice options. And know why you're making that choice available. Be able to explain exactly why that choice is an option for your students. That would be important for parents to understand, for students to understand. Just knowing why that is a good choice to make. Yes, the intention, as Noelle says, you really make sure that the intention of that option is clear. So I'm gonna say it again, you're gonna hear me keep circling back to this. I think you can establish a frame for your plan for this 4th quarter, and I strongly suggest going back and looking at the 3 writing standards. I'll put it this way, the 3 writing standards. In the updated ELA standards, there are 3 writing standards. And you don't have to think of them as just writing, because they actually work in just about any context. The first one is about inquiry. The second one, process and production, having a process for producing a polished product, and making sure that you're composing for audience and purpose. So any genre, any format, will determine the form that you want to take, the way that you want to approach the work. So this frame, inquiry, process, and audience and purpose, this is a great way to approach anything that we're working on. So let's start with a pivot from speech to podcast. It is not unusual for us in our fourth quarter to have a speech plan. Why might it be helpful to add podcast as an option, right? So we don't have to completely throw out the speech that we're going to have the students come into our classes and make. We can pivot to the podcast, because in the podcast format, the student must still provide some inquiry, create some questions, go back and gather some information. But the thing is with a podcast, and certainly as with speech making, but I think more so with podcast, fluency is key. And fluency is a reading standard that has been bumped up into 612 ELA reading. And it's also, fluency is an element of writing. We want to build fluency in writing. And that's a conversation we haven't been having in the past. So one of the reasons to maybe expand your repertoire and add podcast as an option is to help support this idea of fluency. And whether you have been teaching the students and preparing them to make speeches or not, you surely have in your bag of tricks the structures that you need for creating speeches, and it will be similar for a podcast. So here are some differences. A podcast is assuming a relationship with a targeted audience. Podcasts generally are inviting that relationship with the audience, whereas speech, you're talking to your class. Speeches, we're always talking about the visual context, making eye contact, maybe having a visual with you, not bouncing back and forth, rocking on your feet, those kinds of things. That doesn't happen with the podcast. But there are a lot more things that you can do, a lot more elements that you can bring into the podcast that can help the students be more engaged as they're planning. They can do a podcast with the same topic that they were exploring for their speech, and they can maybe have a little more fun with it. I'm going to pause here for a little bit because I've been talking way too long, and I want to let Emma come in and talk about some of the reasons to really embrace the podcast, especially in this environment. And in particular, its last idea about collaboration. I think that's one of the strengths of podcasting that you might not get with speech, is that it invites collaboration. So Emma, you want to comment on this one?
Yes, I will certainly try. I'm sorry that I cut out right at the worst possible time earlier. I'm Emma Banks. I'm the secondary digital learning and computer science specialist at the DOE. So there's that piece of it that I missed out on earlier. So I think that podcasts are a really great way to transform this type of learning experience, particularly for two different reasons. One is the piece that is on this slide at the bottom about collaboration. Collaboration is listed as one of, it's known as the 4 C's of 21st century skills. And it's a critical component of effective distance and online learning is that collaboration piece, because you're not in a classroom. So anything that you can do to kind of substitute that or replace it is a great thing. And a podcast is a great way to do that, because you can have your learners be working together both synchronously or asynchronously, however you set it up, to collaborate on this awesome thing, that they can then deliver and feel super proud about. And, I guess one of the differences between a speech is if you aren't recording a speech, you know, the podcast is automatically recorded. It's automatically, you know, archived. It lives somewhere. So your students can kind of point to that and be like, I made this thing, you know, instead of delivering the speech once and then trying to bury it as far into memory as what they possibly can, if they're anything like me, that is. So, and then the other piece of podcasts that I think is fantastic is that right now, during this period of time where people are looking at screens more than ever, this provides an outlet to get away from that, because you can kind of plan your podcast offline, you know, and then you just record it using some type of a voice recorder. There's so many ways to do that. You could just use a cell phone, really, you know. So it kind of takes away the screen time aspect of it, but it also is a really effective learning experience at the same time. So there are definitely some really great benefits to using a podcast over just like having somebody record a speech in this format.
Great. Thank you very much. So we're going to keep talking about podcasts a little bit more. I just want to be clear that videotaping a speech isn't necessarily making a video. I think that planning a podcast takes a little more I should say, preparing for a podcast takes a little more planning than a traditional speech. And the great thing about a podcast is you can really get families involved. I know a lot of folks have been worried about how much parents and families participate in this. This is a great one. You can make it a family project, you know, doing the podcast, depending on what your topic is. So by the way, the best resource I've ever seen for lesson planning, I'm so excited about this. I cannot say enough. It's the NPR resources for teaching podcasts. It is really comprehensive, complete. It's all there, step by step, logical. It is extremely well done. And besides that, if you wanted to do a genre study of podcasts, NPR is a great resource for looking for those exemplar texts, if you will, the mentor texts for podcasting are great through NPR. So we just want to be clear that the choice options you provide for your students, if you choose to go in this way, you need to make sure that they work for you and your student. The standards and the criteria for your choices should be the same, right? It's the same criteria, it's the same thing that you're looking for. You can pivot and say, never mind speech, we're all going to do podcasts, and then have some choices within it, but still looking for that same criteria. And working with partners or working alone, there's your choices. There's different ways to set up your choice board. Okay, I'm going to talk just a little bit about another choice you could make that we are going to talk about a little more. So in the speaking and listening standards, there's, first of all, the 6 standards have been revised to be 4. They're trying to, there's a logic to paring down these standards. So this is one about comprehension and collaboration. And it's really looking at, it's trying to more explicitly draw in this idea of using media. So reading a play, reading a novel, watching a movie, that at the bottom of this screen is an article that came out from the Chronicle of Higher Ed about people, about really intelligent people who are having trouble reading right now. We talk a lot about social emotional learning and about the things that we're dealing with. And even people who are used to reading and analyzing dense text every single day are having some trouble right now. So what if we pivot and we focus a little bit less on reading and we look at movies, video watching. And there's lots of different ways to do that. So we can have students write a critique of a film. And certainly, if we're working with parents, we can work with parents for developing a list of potential films. But the idea is the same. that the students are going to report out on critiquing a film that they maybe watch with their parents. So here are some really interesting sources for some lesson plans. Read, Write, Think has one specifically for 9-12. Scholastic has one with that is designed for younger students. And so I'm going to admit I have the BritBox thing. I've been watching a lot of British TV, so I really enjoyed looking at the lesson plan from the UK. It's about writing film reviews. And so the language in there is a little bit different, and it's geared toward older students as well. So it's okay. I mean, it's really viable. It does align to our standards to be thinking about stories that are told in these other media, and to use those. So let's talk about that critique. Maybe that critique is not written as an essay. Maybe that critique is written as a blog. So here's the thing to think about. If we pivot from standard essay to blog instead, we definitely need to do a genre study about blogs, because kids, when they start looking for information on a topic, they might stumble into a blog and not realize it's a blog. And they don't recognize the difference between, say, a scholarly article and a blog, which may be written by a scholarly person or may not. I mean, it could be just somebody's ideas. So it's good to know there's a great opportunity to do a genre study. And again, a blog, like a podcast, it's created with a specific audience in mind. It's meant to reach somebody and to interact. And the blog invites conversation. It's another way to invite that interaction. And think about it. If any of you have taken any course online, chances are you were required to respond to other people's ideas, whether you're doing it in Blackboard or some other format in your class. We really do need to be getting students ready to respond in a digital format appropriately to other people's ideas. So this is a good practice. Now, Emma, one of the concerns I've heard people express about blog writing in particular is being able to control publication and audience. Who has access to that? Can you talk a little bit about how we can teach students blog writing in a closed or controlled environment?
Yeah, certainly. So a lot of learning management systems have a blog function built into it. So that is probably your number one easiest way of controlling the messaging and who sees it and things of that nature, because then it's withheld in your own learning management system. However, there are other blog programs or tools out there that each one of them have their own safety and security features, and you can limit who your audience is. So you can share with specific people, similarly to like Google Docs functionality. You can very much limit your audience. You can either publish it as public, or you can have a closed group and kind of have a blog in there, or depending on your platform will depend on your exact configuration. But there are certainly many, many ways to restrict your audience there.
So if this is something that you're interested in doing, we're certainly gearing up to help you do that with some integrity and some comfort. So I just wanted to share with you as well. There are some resources if you want to be teaching with blogs. I think as a genre study, it doesn't hurt, and it would be a good idea at some point to make sure that students know what blogs are and how they should and should not be used and what the formats are. So here's a couple of sources. I always like Read, Write, Think. That's from NCTE. And school journalism, specifically about, blogging from a journalistic perspective and developing those lesson plans. I just want to emphasize that your criteria for success really should include responding appropriately to others. The sooner we teach kids that, the better. We may need to be teaching adults some of that as well, by the way. So here's a few things I wanted to make you aware of this. The ELA professional learning resources. Okay, I'm working on that. Just before this session began, I posted the recordings of the previous 3 sessions, and I'll be working to build out that site as well. The Learning and Technology professional learning resources is fantastic. If you're interested in anything we've talked about today, go over there, and certainly contact Emma, and we'll keep adding to that. And I wanted to make sure you saw on this last slide, if you're looking for the contact hours, I swear I appropriately linked the contact hours to this one. I double checked on this. So this is where you can give us feedback. So I'm going to stop the share for a moment and open up discussion. We've talked about a lot of things here, and what we're trying to do is plant the seeds or build the foundation for the kind of work that we're going to do to bring this 4th quarter to a close, but also we're being asked to continue PD through the summer and think about the lasting effects on our classrooms in the fall. What are some of the things that we're learning right now about our students and about our instructional practices that we want to carry forward? You know, I mean, I know this is, once we're out of emergency framework, then what are the lessons we're learning that we can carry forward? So if you have a burning question right now, a concern, or a great idea you'd like to share about our pivots.
Morgan, this is John. I just had a quick comment, I guess, or observation maybe.
Okay.
Self-observation. One of the things this has done for me, you know, because we all want to think about what good is coming out of this strange time we're in, is that it's basically forced us to learn new ways to do things. And some of those things, you know, I'll just use Google Classroom as an example. That's one of the things that I've always wanted to dig more into, and it always gets pushed to the side because there's something more immediate to do. So now I can really sink my teeth into it. So come fall, or whenever they decide to let us back, you can hit the ground running using it right away. Whereas the year before you were like, maybe I'll do it. Oh, I guess I don't have time. So it gives us a lot more options going forward for sure.
Yeah, the silver lining. I will tell you, and Emma can talk to this, I'm sure, at length. I heard from our technology folks that when this started, they were really excited, like, yes, this is our time, we're gonna shine. And then they realized how much people didn't know. You know, that idea of, I have these things, but I haven't quite embraced them like I might have. So there was a steeper learning curve than they had anticipated. Okay, so we're learning. And hopefully that curve has flattened as well. Can I just say that? So Linda, it's interesting. If you're looking at 30 minutes a day, there's different configurations. And so, yeah, that's interesting. So your directions are provide 30 minutes a day for schoolwork? I'm not really sure I'm understanding what I'm assuming that it's the directions from your administration, right?
Yeah, they're asking us the kids not doing work more than 2.5 hours a day on everything.
Mm-hmm. So some districts, some schools are looking at, there's a few things. There is blended learning. Is Kim still here? Where's Kim? You know, there are some schools that are doing some crossover, like multi-discipline kind of teaching. Hi, Kim. So that instead of saying it's this much time for this content and this, that they're planning some units together. So that can help. And yes, Noelle saying collaborate with a colleague. Yes, I'm hearing a lot of that. By the way, Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey's school out in California, it's a 612 school, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking it, they're looking at from the student perspective and doing some multi-discipline planning. So you're sharing the assignments, share the time.
Oh, sorry, Morgan. I would just add also that there are some resources online to find like movies that are, they're not like copyrighted, right? So you could find them and share the link out so that somebody could watch it online or watch it, like download it and watch it with their family. And then you could reflect on it during class time versus spending the class time watching the movie.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't consider class time watching the movie. Yeah, I would say, especially if you're working with parent groups. I know there are a lot of parent groups that are looking for it. Yeah, and being flexible with due dates. It's really about getting that assignment done. Just as an alternative to reading at the moment. But again, it's gotta fit. Yeah.
I will say that in our school, now I teach grades 7 and 8, so we collaborate all the time, right? That's that whole team approach. So I think it's a little harder for perhaps 9 to 12 to start collaborating in this kind of environment. Not impossible, but I think it's more of a challenge.
Yeah.
So we just met via Zoom and said, what can we do, come up with this theme and what can be the math component to this theme, because in our district, we've been told no new content. So for us, it's, okay, what are those essential skills that we want kids to just keep practicing so they don't lose? And I will say I Zoomed, this is my 5th Zoom today. So I Zoomed with all of my classes today and they were all engaged, and it really was kind of something great to bring them back in. So I will say that if, I'll ask them if I did share it with Morgan, so I'll just make sure that it's okay with them, and maybe she can send it out to people if anybody's interested in looking at what we did. So
absolutely. And that's another piece, as I start to collect some resources from folks, and I see some questions. This is great. People are asking questions. Send stuff to me, because I'm designing that place where we can park them. I know we've talked about being able to share your great lessons and your great ideas. So as long as you're willing to let me share, I'm figuring out how to do that with some integrity. Tiff got off the beach and went to the office. And I have to tell you, I have really enjoyed listening to podcasts. I was a little surprised how much I like that. But I have had a good time.
I'll jump in talking about podcasts. I have a cousin who was saying something about how she just misses the buzz and the noise of a school. And so she can't really get away from listening to podcasts constantly and all the time. And we are so alike, she and I. The idea of creating podcasts really is appealing to me. I'm wondering what success people have had with that in the past. And I'm thinking about engagement issues. One thing that I learned from this experience is that in the beginning, we were sort of mid-project, and so we finished that project. And now that it's done, for the past 2 days, yesterday and today, I did a kind of check a to-do list sort of thing. And it was let's read this poem and tell sort of a text rendering. What was your favorite line? What was your favorite word and why? And out of the number of students that I have, I only didn't hear back from 4 of them. So when I look at that like action research, I say to myself, okay, if it's this long-term, multi-step, over time kind of thing, my students might not want to do that. But if it's, here's the thing, and now do this with it, they got really deep with it, mostly. And so I'm kind of struggling with, how do I make sure I'm reaching the most people versus how do I maybe get them to do their very best work? And I don't know if anyone has anything to say to that or how to speak to that.
So I'm letting that digital wait time occur. I think that wait time in the digital format is longer than the live classroom. Emma, I think that I heard a couple of assignments for us. One would be curating some of those specific examples of podcasts as mentor texts, serving the same role as the mentor text for middle school and for high school. And another one is definitely looking at if somebody wanted to use movies maybe more than books right now, what are some of those? There's always the movie versions of a lot of the books that we've read. But also, just especially talking to your parents, what are they streaming? I know that my daughter's families both still try to do the Friday night movie night thing. So maybe you can suggest to parents, watch these movies, and then we'll do a homework assignment about the movie that you're watching as a family. So that things appropriate to families can be helpful. So anyway, Emma, I think that's something for you and I. Looking more at podcasts and movies, definitely.
Yeah, certainly. Kate, I see your question or your thought in the chat about examples for podcasts that would be good for kids. There are a lot of resources for that. I don't really have any off the top of my head, but I would say that if you do just a general search for education podcasts, you should be able to find some resources that even tell you what age range they're targeted for. There's a lot out there.
Yeah, I didn't know if anyone had any specific examples of things that have worked well. I definitely have used StoryCorps in the classroom, and that has been pretty powerful. I mean, I think to some extent podcasts, when I think podcasts, I know what they are, but my 12 and 13-year-olds don't listen to podcasts. So I didn't know if there was another, something related to sports or something like that.
We, in my school, did a This I Believe unit, and you can hear a lot of great This I Believe. So that really speaks to Morgan's point of taking a known kind of entity, a speech like that, or an essay, personal essay, and then transforming it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, these are great ideas, and I think that to John's point, there's probably a lot of things that were right there at our fingertips that we just weren't reaching for. Oh yeah, And now this context is really making us reach for them and understand them and explore them a little more. The moth, I'm not sure I know the moth. Oh, TED Talks always. TED Talks are a little different than podcasts necessarily. I will tell you, I think I mentioned this. Where was I when I mentioned this? I'm just repeating myself now. But there was the TED Talk about the guy whose father was one of the 1992 World Trade Center bombers. And so he gave a TED Talk about what it's like to grow up in America as the son of a known terrorist. It's called Son of a Terrorist. And from his TED Talk, he wrote a book. And the book is fascinating. Just it's talking about his childhood, how he grew up and how he, it's just fascinating. I'll leave it at that. Radio Live from NPR, yeah. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to mention, to follow up on the TED Talks, a lot of you may already know this, but one of the things that I've started doing recently is I finally signed up for some of the educational resources, and in my email every day I get a lesson. Now you may get 100 of these and use 20 of them, but every day there's going to be something there, and then you can decide, can I use this or not? So I always see that every day.
That's great. Keep in mind that journalists are shifting over to podcasts as a way to stay alive. No Romeo and Juliet this year. I know, that would have killed me. We always did Romeo and Juliet in April. I don't know why. It just seemed like the exact right time, spring love, I guess. I don't know what it was. Yeah, that's a tough one. I actually was teaching 9th grade English, the Romeo and Juliet, the year that the Leonardo DiCaprio, Claire Danes, modern version thing came out. And I got to take the whole class to the movie theater to see it. That was fun. That was a lot of fun, actually. All right, so I'm thinking Emma and I thought that we might come out of this with a West Side Story. Yes, of course. Can't read Romeo and Juliet, you can watch West Side Story, absolutely. Yeah. Emma and I thought we might come out of this with some tasks for us, and I think we definitely have, and we'll talk more. But we'll be building out our site in the next couple of days. Okay, now let me remind you, Emma's new to our team. She's been with us about a month. And when I talked to her a couple hours ago, I said, I think we'll come out of this session today with some tasks to do. Do you think that maybe we can get it done in 48 hours so that when I do office hours on Friday, I can show? And Emma thought that was reasonable. So, 48-hour turnaround for the questions you've asked and the things that we're going to try to grab. Zach Ibrahim, that's his name. Yes. Yeah, and Zach Ibrahim wrote a book because of the TED Talk. It started with the TED Talk, and there was so much interest, and he did it so well. And the TED Talk is like 12 or 15 minutes. Is Slave Driver a movie?
I'm pretty sure that was in reference to the 48-hour turnaround.
Oh, me. Totally missed it. Yeah, well, I think we call it initiation to DOE. Oh, that was a good one. Oh, excellent. Well, I want to be respectful of our time. I thank you all for coming. I want to remind you, any questions that you have, send them to me. you have great ideas. If you have things you're willing to share, please send those to me. I'm going to try, if you join me for Thursday for the office hours, I'm going to try to have some of these things posted and ready to go and show you how we're going to do that. So that's what Emma and I will be working on. So send me anything. Always willing. I'm always here. My cat and I are always here. She lives here. So Tisha, I'm going to put the link to the Padlet right here. It was also in, there you go. Thank you, Patty. I look for those images. Doug Fisher is a huge fan of, don't say it with words, provide an image, and then support it that way. So ever since, I've been trying to do lots of images. But the Padlet, it's in columns now so that everything relevant to the session is in that. So grab them, take them, make them yours, do whatever you'd like. Excellent. All right. Don't forget to go get your contact hours. Give me some feedback, and great. Thank you all. All right. Take care. Good to see you. Get out and walk.
Thanks a lot.
Good day, everybody.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Morgan.